One of the core fundamentals of being a human, everybody likes a sweetheart. Especially when purchasing things. There are a lot of car brands all over the world which are region-specific and sell extremely well in that specific part of territory. But what happens when a sweetheart dies? In the auto industry YouTube channels, there's, a few videos that go around, you know what I mean? Kind of like the same video, like the history of the Toyota Prius, you know what I mean? Just videos that are done over and over and over again by different kinds of channels. And how Holden died is, again, a very common one, and I have, in fact, done it before. But I didn't do it justice. You see, the story of Holden is often misunderstood or oversimplified. People will just say, GM came in, there were too many cars competing in the same markets and rebadging, and that's it. Now, that is the truth. Holden did die from mass GM rebadging, and we'll tie into it later, but Holden, and this is why I think it's important, because I'm not a person who just remakes videos for no reason. Holden is an excellent example of why EVs cannot go on the way that they are. Specifically, why the Toyota EV strategy stinks. So we'll get onto that later, but Holden is just very interesting. And they did die from rebadging, but not in the way that people think. New Zealand, a very beautiful country with, lots of space, beautiful landmarks, clean air, nice people, a lot of history, you know what I mean? A very interesting country, is actually hell for the car market. And it's part of the New Zealand problem. Now, this refers to a lot of the issues in the country, and the main one being reliance. They have to rely on other countries and large corporations to get things done. Now, that just sounds very generic and very basic, so let me kind of explain it to you. It's kind of running a car company in a small country, specifically a localized car company, or even a large car company, is hard work. Why? Because it's kind of like the Goldilocks of screwing you up. First of all, the country's large enough to actually, it's worth it. You know what I mean? You get sales, you get money, you want money, so it's worth selling cars there. And yet the country is too small, however, to make lots of cars there, or to, sell enough cars there to bring over a lot of models. And yet it's essentially the idea of they want the same number of models as other countries. But they buy a whole lot less, and it's hard to make them there, it's hard to have dealership networks and stuff just because the country is so small. So as a car company, you're in this thing. You can make local cars, which are made there with resources that are there. The issue is it's such a small country that, you could, but there's not that many models, and you need to support it with parts from all over the world, or you can do what a lot of car companies are doing now, which is just take models that are made in China or elsewhere and just ship them over. That's essentially the issue. The issue is country is too small, but selling cars there is worth it, but making cars there is not that great, so we'll just ship all of them over. Now, why is this a problem? Because, to you that just sounds like, well, duh, that's just obvious. The issue is shipping cars over is expensive. It's inefficient, it just doesn't go very well. So that's an issue with selling cars in smaller car companies. Now, when you think of small countries, we're selling cars in smaller car companies, selling cars in smaller areas. Now, when you think of this problem, you probably don't think of Australia, and yet the issue is present there too. But you see, Australia, when you think of a small country, you don't think of Australia. It's large, about the same size as the continental United States, and yet with the population of California. And here's what makes Australia so interesting. So for, let's say, it's not like North Sentinel Island, where it's so small it's not even worth shipping cars there. It's worth selling cars in California, and it's worth selling cars in Australia. You want those people. The issue is, however, California has the same taste as the rest of the continental United States. SUVs, a couple hardtop convertibles, they follow the fads and stuff like that. European countries, so smaller islands and smaller areas in Europe and America are easier to manage. You want to know why? Because their tastes are more global. You know what I mean? You already make cars which fit their tastes. Australia is different, and Australia is weird. You see, their taste in cars is different because their geography is in Oceania. It's an entirely different continent. So that adds to, you know what I mean? And what I mean here is very fundamental differences. You know what I mean? In the United States, we like small, compact SUVs. Why? Because what we really need is hatchbacks. The Europeans like hatchbacks because they don't have rough terrain. The Americans like hatchbacks, but they want all-wheel drive hatchbacks that look like SUVs to make themselves feel good about themselves. And Australia wants actually capable, good SUVs, and even their own little brand of truck called a ute. If you don't know that, this is such a simple explanation. But the issue is, Australia, big country, small population, has extremely unique taste in cars, and not a whole lot of, you know what I'm saying here? So you see the issues that are coming awry here. And yet Australia, believe it or not, did have their own car company. And that car company is obviously Holden. Now, if you want the big long history, here's some AI slop generated Google answer, transition to car manufacturing. But if you really care, you can read this. Dankpods and native Australians will explain it and do it much better than I ever could. But essentially, Holden was an Australian-only car company, for better or for worse, and then eventually, and they were always intertwined with GM. A lot of people, and for some reason, for how popular car content is on YouTube, a lot of it's strangely inaccurate. A lot of people will say GM bought Holden, and that's not really how it worked. It's nice to simplify it and say Holden was on their own, they were doing great, GM bought them, started rebadging everything, and then it went to shit. No, you see, the story is kind of that, but more complex. First of all, GM didn't buy Holden. They did this, it's a weird handshake. So essentially, Holden was building for GM, and then during the Great Depression, things weren't going well, they merged. That's essentially what it is. So the issue with Holden and GM wasn't just GM came in and then started rebadging everything. GM was fine under Holden for a very long time. They were one and the same. So the issue does not stem from GM buying Holden. That's a common misconception. GM bought it, it turned to shit. That's not what happened at all. They were essentially one and the same. So you can forget the entire narrative of GM bought Holden and then turned it to shit. That's not what happened. However, the reason Holden died is rebadging. So this is a confusing thing. So the question becomes, how did this happen? How did Holden go from doing well under GM's control, not direct control, doing well, being partners with GM, to GM sending all their cars over there to be rebadged, then killing off the Commodore and killing off all local models, and then just being an import-only brand, and then eventually on their deathbed in 2020. So the question is, how did that happen? And this is where it comes back to the New Zealand problem. So let's just remind ourselves that the issue is Australia is large enough for it to be worth it to sell cars there. Not that large, they can build their own cars there, but it's kind of annoying, and it's much cheaper to just ship the small parts from other existing cars that were designed elsewhere over, and then build the big stuff like the frames in Australia. That's what they were doing. It gets around having to import whole cars. You can import door handles from the United States, and just, you know what I mean? So that's what they were doing. The issue is they're just shit at it. If all they had done was replace local Holden models with rebadges, it wouldn't have been great, because reliability would go down. It would have made a mockery out of the brand. Here's some examples of the issue is they did it at the same time. They had both Australian local models and Holden and Opel and GM and Chevy all being sold at the same time. That's what killed them. So imports are not the issue. It's not, they imported cars so they suck. There are plenty of imports. If you need Camrys in Mexico and you build a bunch of Camrys in the US, drive them down to Mexico and sell them there. You know what I mean? That's exactly the solution here. So importing cars does not mean your car company is going to fail. Importing is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. The issue is importing them at the same damn time. That's an issue. So this is where it comes back to the Toyota EV strategy. So essentially what GM was doing was, in the global market of how many cars GM sells, within that's the big thing. So no, let's zoom all the way out. And then, when you're at a neighborhood or something, it's like Crestwater, at Crestville, at Crest Village, at Euclid, at Kansas, where they just go at Earth, and then they keep going. Let's do that. So big global car market. Within that, we have the amount of cars GM sells globally. Within that, we have the entire Australian market. Within that, we have the number of cars GM sells in the Australian market. Then within that, we have Holden and Opel. They introduced Opel for some reason as the luxury brand in Australia, which didn't go well. So now we have Holden and Opel, and then within that, again, within each brand, there were two categories: locally built, locally designed models, and then foreign models that were shipped over, and then another thing, which was foreign models that were not shipped over, but yet most of the parts were built. So much stuff. It's just so convoluted and annoying, and this is what killed them. And so they tried to, here's a big thing that killed Holden. So GM was kind of antsy. They're like, we like Holden, but we need a luxury brand, so we're going to bring over Opel as like a premium brand. It didn't go so well. Opel had no traction because no one liked Opel over there, because remember, special taste. A European car company is not going to work in Australia. So the Opel Astra and Chevrolet Cruze were sold at the exact same time simultaneously in Australia, which was already a bad thing to do. Because again, small luxury brands and GMC and all these shitty brands that we have here in the United States exist because we have that many people to buy the cars from the extra brands. In foreign countries, that does not work. If you're hearing the rain outside, you appreciate that I left the window open for you. So what they did was they sold the Chevrolet Cruze and the Opel Astra at the same time. And then what happened there was Opel was doing really shit, and then what they decided in 2013, after a rough year, they said, you want to know what? We're going to axe Holden. We're going to axe Opel. And we're going to bring all of Opel's models over to Holden. So now, keeping track, we have the Opel Astra being sold as a Holden alongside the Chevrolet Cruze, which is already a rebadged We have the Holden Cruise being sold alongside the Opel Astra, which is now the Holden Astra. So two cars that are directly competing against each other with different prices for the same market in the same territory. Both of them, one of them being shipped over and partially built there, the other one being partially built there and with a lot of parts from the Chevrolet Cruze being shipped over. I'm sure, you know what, so complicated. This is what killed Holden. This stupid bullshit tap dance of, we're going to import cars, fine. We're going to get rid of legacy Holden models with imports, fine. We're going to bring Opel over, not so fine. We're going to introduce all of Opel's models into Holden, not fine. We're going to keep both of them at the same time. Like, you could kill off the Cruze and replace, and yet they're like, oh, we'll just have 19,000 different cars all at the same time. That didn't help. And then after that, after 2013, it was just a shit show. I mean, it was a total shit show. They had Holden, which was also Opel, which was also, it was just a bunch of car companies in a trench coat, and they couldn't figure out what the hell they were trying to do. This was already an issue Holden had before they made too many cars. You know, it's like in Hotel Hell where they have the tiny shoebox kitchen, they have an entire book's worth of menu items. You can't do that. It's a small car company in a small country which doesn't buy that many cars. You cannot have 18 different cars in the same market. It was a shit show. I mean, and when I mean it was a shit show, they had no idea what the hell they were doing. It's like GM, they also knew how to sell to Australians. They knew utes, they knew sedans, which they like over there, they knew big trucks, they had all that stuff, and yet they decided, let's bring in small sedans, and the Chevy Trax, and the Chevy Equinox, and I mean, so what led the grounds for Holden to be called was, let's do a little evolution here. So Holden was already, you know, it was fine. They were doing fine, you know, being, you know, replacing their legacy models with rebadges from GM. Some of them were built over there, like the Chevrolet Cruze was built over there. It was designed elsewhere, but it was built over there. The hatchback was designed there. They built it there with a lot of parts from foreign markets, but, you know, it was mainly an Australian car. Then they brought over Opel, which was a terrible idea. Big rebadge brand that does not fit the local needs, not even a little bit. Very unconvincing. Then they decided to kill that off and introduce it to Holden, and then it was a shit show. Too many models, and then after that, it was an even bigger shit show, because then GM, they have eras, you know what I mean? So they had they had the Blazer and stuff like that, and then they rebadged all that as the Opel Bravada, as the Oldsmobile Bravada, and the Cadillac Escalade. You know, they did all that crap. They the Chevrolet Tahoe and Suburban. They did all that. They did all the rebadging. They have like eras, you know, like the Chrysler Cloud cars or the minivans, like the Uplander, where they get this one car and then they rebadge it 12 different times, and then they move on to the next one. And unfortunately, by 2017, they had gotten into the lumpy Chevrolet era. And what I mean by that was the last years of Holden were spent with these absolute malignant tumors of remnants of their past. They came just in time at the shittiest time in GM's history of all the shitty cars. They came just in time for the cloud, unconvincing cars of the Chevrolet Cruze, Chevrolet Equinox, and Chevrolet Trax. 3 cars which are so insecure they don't feel like they fit in any brand. I've driven the GMC Terrain. One of my people in my family has a Chevrolet Equinox. The names don't even matter. And yet every single car I've driven that's a Chevy Trax or a Buick in Enclave or whatever, they never feel like they're that brand. They always feel insecure, they feel weird, they feel wobbly. They got the Holden Colorado for some reason, even though they know that Australia likes utes, which is just straight up stupid. They got the Sonic and Spark remnants from, believe it or not, Daewoo. They got Daewoo remnants as well. I mean, it was a party of GM's rebadged self and all the brands they had cannibalized in the past, just hanging out, this malignant tumor, slowly swallowing up Holden until they could no longer deal with they were absolutely malignant tumors. Like, they thought they would sell well, they didn't cater well to the Australian market, they didn't look good, they didn't feel good, they were unconvincing, they weren't that powerful, they weren't that reliable, and they just died. And this ridiculousness is what's happening with EVs. The Chevrolet, this is what I'm warning you about. EVs will die, even though some of the technology is neat and they could technically work. Thank you, technology connections, yada, yada, yada. Even though they're going to kill themselves if they do this. It's, you know, the Chevrolet Equinox EV, which is also the Honda Prostate, and then the Subaru Solterra, which is the BZ4X. If we let EVs keep being massive rebadges, I can only hope. And I'm not a fan of EVs. I think hydrogen's great. I think EVs are bullshit. I think EVs are fine, but I'm saying they're definitely not the answer. They're not going to stay around for that long. They're just being sold because Curtis wants to sell more battery management systems. That's my theory on EVs here. But the point is, if EVs keep being just a bunch of rebadges, my best hope is that it's just in the beginning. It's just because we don't have that much tech. It's just because everyone's scrambling to get them. I really, really hope that's it. But if it's not, and EVs will continue to just be rebadges, they will die the same way Holden died, with a bunch of malignant EVs which are no good with absolutely zero ingenuity or region-specific features. And you want to know what, mate? That's it. I mean, that's the story of how Holden died. Everyone's curious. Everyone would say it's just due to rebadges. What they don't know is the small island, the island boys problem, the issue of car company, car area, which is worth selling cars in, but doesn't have enough people to justify, you know what I mean? Which has enough people to justify selling cars in, yet is not large enough to have a big enough serious industry to support the amount of cars that they need, that has specialized tastes. This is just the issue. So with that, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you all real soon.